nation and pay respects to their continuing connection to the land, waters and community. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and their descendants. Just for those people in the gallery, but more importantly for people at home, we've had trouble with the live streaming. The agenda forum is normally live streamed, however this evening it can't be guaranteed as there's been a malfunction in the live streaming equipment which to date has been unable to be fixed today. Our apologies for any inconvenience caused. This may cause to either councillors or members of the public, and I suppose I'll get some feedback shortly whether it's working or not. That takes us to item 2, the disclaimer. The terms of condition of entry into the chambers are posted on the door as you enter. Please ensure that you've read them prior to attending, and the only thing I do say in addition to that is that for those people making deputations, please make your comments respectful not only to the council but to any other members of the public. Item 3, attendance and apologies. Councillor Parry is on an approved leave of absence. Councillor Prodovnik is an apology tonight, and I believe all other councillors are in attendance. Item 4, declarations of financial proximity interest or interest affecting impartiality. Are there any, Mr. CEO?
Just been handed a couple.
That's a leave of absence. Just one here. I've got one from Mr. Vanderlyn. It's on item 2.2, the draft Guildford Heritage Area Local Planning Policy, and it's an impartiality interest, and the reason is that his daughter's partner, who did not work on this project, is employed by the consultancy Element and are engaged to prepare the policy, that although the partner didn't work on it. Thank you, Mr. Vanderlyn. Are there any others, Councillor? Councillor Johnson first.
Yeah, 13.9 and 2.2.
Okay, if you can complete the relevant form, Councillor Congdon.
4.2, thank you, impartiality.
Thank you. If you can complete those forms, and they'll be listed in the run sheet for next week. No others, councillors? Then thank you. We'll move on to item 5, public question time, questions relating to reports contained in with the agenda. Item 5.1, questions of which due notice have been given, there are nil. Item 5.2, questions without due notice, there is nil. So it takes us to item 6, reports and notices of motions. Item 6.1, additional information from officers. Councillors, you'll note there are 2 additional reports for the ordinary council meeting that have been added, and a supplementary agenda will have these items. 7.4, local government reform, election transition arrangements, and that was as a result of council receiving a letter from the local government minister last week. And item C, 3.3, Allenbrook Youth Centre funding contingency. Moving on to item 6.2, deputations. In accordance with the current procedures for public participation at agenda forums, all requests for in-person deputations and submissions of written deputations were required by 3 p.m. Tuesday the 27th of September 2022, and all written deputations received by 3 p.m. on the 22nd were circulated with the preliminary agenda last night. Part A. Item 13.9, proposed community purpose, Women's Rehabilitation Centre, Lot 8, number 2118, Great Northern Highway, Bullsbrook, is on page 15 of the agenda, and there are 5 in-person deputations. Each deputation is limited to 5 minutes, and the first person speaking against the recommendation is Lily Cornish. Is Lily here? Thank you. If you could make your way to the podium. If you could push the speak button until the red light on the microphone comes on. And once you start speaking, you'll have 5 minutes. Thank you.
I object to the recommended approval given by the City of Swan Planning Department in regards to DA 21522. On the 6th of July at the City of Swan Council meeting, the following question was asked. Does Council consider the loss of a person's safe and secure enjoyment of their property a loss of amenity and thereby a planning consideration? It was answered yes. I would like to bring to your attention the unjust harassment, lies and unneighbourly behaviour your fellow City of Swan ratepayers and citizens are being subject to. As I'm sure many of you are aware, Mr Peter Lyndon James often uses his large following through Shalom House to incite hate, and once again his neighbours have become his target. His neighbours have been subject to years' worth of lies and antics, which can be evidenced, but I will point out the latest. On the 19th and 20th of September, Mr Peter Lyndon James posted that his neighbours had stolen a lamb and falsely accused Shalom House of animal cruelty. Firstly, what Mr Lyndon James claims is not the truth. This can be backed up with photographic and video evidence and by an independent witness. A Shalom staff member identified as Johnny passed a severely ill lamb over the fence to a concerned member of the public. The lamb was later returned. No theft took place, and there were no allegations made against Shalom House. Most importantly, it was not a neighbour who took possession of the lamb. There are now 300 plus comments relating to what despicable people his neighbours are, with some people even offering to take matters into their own hands. Secondly, Mr Lyndon James has implicated every one of his neighbours into this supposed crime. To my understanding, Shalom House own multiple properties where sheep are kept. The most obvious is Lot 8 to 118 Great Northern Highway, as the sheep can be observed from the highway. As the neighbour to Lot 8, I know for certain that this sheep stealing event did not take place here. Now, the neighbours of Lot 8 are now the main targets of harassment from Shalom House supporters. I, for instance, had someone slow by my front gate and yell the words "sheep killing scum" to me as I was standing by my car. I feel unsafe, and I do fear it is only a matter of time before this vigilante behaviour turns dangerous. I have lost the secure enjoyment of my property. This is clearly a loss of amenity. Thirdly, as Mr Lyndon James stated himself, Shalom House do not own the livestock concerned in this event. Why then has he implicated himself and Shalom House in this situation? I believe he has done so for no other reason than to rile hate once again unjustly against his neighbours. As his newest neighbours, we can only expect more of the same over the coming years. The City of Swan themselves have been the target of Mr Lyndon James, and to my understanding, staff and councillors have been harassed by him and his supporters. Imagine now your address being exposed to 40,000 plus people, some of whom who have made threats against your family. During a phone call, a City of Swan staff member stated that they were not allowed to enter a Shalom House property without prior approval. When questioned why this was, they answered that there are people there who have issues with authority, and there are people known to act in unpredictable manners. If the City of Swan won't even allow their staff near a Shalom House property because of the perceived dangers, how can they find it appropriate that Shalom operate next door to young families? As a uni student, I have much better things to be doing with my time, but I will no longer stand by and watch the mental well-being of my parents and neighbours be destroyed. I fully expect this deputation to be taken out of context, Mr Lyndon James to post it or reference it on his Facebook pages, and for myself to once again become the target of hate and criticism, purely because I've aired my experiences and concerns. Finally, I'd like to end with posing you a question. Mr Lyndon James claims that wherever he moves, the neighbours are always against him and his program. What is it that the neighbours are witnessing and putting up with that no one else sees that make him so opposed to him? Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Sorry, Lily, Councillor Johnson has a question to start with.
Yeah, I've just got one question. Have you reported this to the police?
Reported what?
Well, you've made a number of comments about feeling unsafe.
I'm sorry, but police don't take reports because I'm not, I haven't got a body cam on me. So when people yell abuse at me, I don't have evidence and they won't take that into account. But there are multiple police reports relating to other neighbours being harassed and intimidated.
Any other questions, councillors? Then thank you for your attendance and your deputation. The next in-person deputation is Mr Troy Van Heemst. Thank you, Troy. You'll have 5 minutes from when you start speaking.
Thank you, Mayor, councillors and staff. I'd suggest that there are only two fair and reasonable options in front of you, councillors. You may vote against this proposal and let SAT sort the details out. You may seek a temporary approval, setting the conditions aside, so that Shalom House has time to seamlessly transfer its operations to another location. To approve this proposal would be grossly unreasonable. The officer's report contradicts the fundamental principles of town planning and uses case precedents to determine land use permissibility that are not relevant to this proposal. In a nutshell, staff have referenced the SAT findings in DR 79 to determine that the proper use classification of the applicant to be a community purpose, and this use, unlike every other use similar or likeable to running a rehabilitation centre, is a permitted use but only where discretion is granted for approval in this room. Had the land use been described as a dependent person's dwelling, a group dwelling as in Park and Forest Street, a medical centre, a multiple dwelling, a place of worship, a place of assembly, a residential building, an educational establishment, a hospital or a consulting room, none of these are permitted uses in the landscape zone. The adoption of a community purpose land use for rehabilitation centres is relatively new and something that is causing headaches for city planners all across Australia. The state government acknowledges the problem and have promised to deliver legislation on the matter. Central to the Park Street determination that community purpose was the proper use classification were three very important considerations. And the first two are in my written deputation and will be dealt with later. And the third consideration, which was said to weigh heavily in favour of the approval for Park Street, was the perceived community benefit of the Shalom House operation. So the tribunal looked at the benefit to the community as a whole, and Mr Peter Lyndon James gave evidence at that hearing, and there was no contradictory evidence presented. Therefore, the entirety of Mr Lyndon James's evidence was accepted. This officer's report references Park and Forest Street SAT decisions as an authority for this proposal. Well, I'd like for the Council to consider 2118 Great Northern Highway as a unique property. I'd like Council to consider that the landscape zone is not the same as a rural residential zone. I'd like Council to consider that the overall community benefit of this proposal relative to the location that this proposal is actually located at. Well, the proposal is to rehabilitate 24 women. Australia-wide success rates are 30%. In Shalom's unique case, 18 to 24 months might be used as an average length of time to achieve rehabilitation. So we are therefore looking at successfully rehabilitating 8 women every 18 to 24 months at this property. Now, there's no doubt that there's a community benefit here. But what of the community cost? So I form part of the community in Bullsbrook. I have done for over 20 years. And I live next door to 2118 Great Northern Highway, so I can speak on the matter. It's true that myself and other neighbours are private people, and we've chosen to live in a quiet and secluded area. There are 2 families of 4 flanking this property, and all 8 people have been adversely affected already. We are anxious and we are stressed at the invasion of our privacy and at the arrival of the commune next door. Other neighbours in the vicinity are similarly upset, and some have been intimidated by Shalom residents and victimised by Shalom on social media, some of which you've just heard about. Local business owners have expressed dismay at being undercut in the marketplace by Shalom businesses. Those local business owners have to pay staff commercial wages and then pay tax on any profits they might make. Well, this gives Shalom a distinct and unfair competitive advantage in that marketplace. Additionally, the local community is in turmoil over the recent hate posts on the Shalom Facebook page, and I'm constantly hearing that I'm the unlucky or NIMBY neighbour when I frequent Bullsbrook. And more recently, the lamb incident has escalated the town gossip on Shalom and its neighbours.
You have 1 minute left, thank you.
In my opinion, Shalom is creating a divide in the community. Then there is the non-compliance by Shalom Group, repeated again and again. In only 6 months, I've witnessed the arrival of illegal buildings, businesses operating without a permit, commercial vehicles parked on rural land, violation of the Health Act, the ongoing operation of a lodging house without authorisation, and the ongoing use of private property without authority. I don't wish to labour the point, but none of this evidence was considered by the tribunal when community purpose was gifted to Shalom Group on the back of the community benefit that was expected. The social licence that Shalom have been trusted with has not been treated with the respect it deserves. And how many people must suffer before the community costs outweigh the benefits? For Shalom Group to continue to grow and deliver its important services, this property appears to be an inappropriate choice. Main roads have limited the future growth to 36 people, and with the cost of meeting the conditions imposed by the city, this property represents a minimum of $2.3 million investment. Now, with this in mind, I've held constructive and respectful meetings.
Thank you, Mr Van Heest. That's your 5 minutes. Have you got much to go? I'll allow you an extra 30 seconds.
Just concluding now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. With this in mind, I've held constructive and respectful meetings with both Mr Peter Lyndon James and the Chair of the Board, Mike Price. I have proposed a way forward. I have found an interested buyer for the property who has offered a generous purchase price. Now, this third party is empathetic to the residents of the program and is prepared to be lenient in allowing time for Shalom Group to purchase another property and move the residents without causing any undue stress. In the event that both parties could come to an in-principle agreement prior to the October 5th Council meeting, might I suggest that temporary approval be considered by Council? Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, councillors? Then once again, I thank you for your attendance and your deputation. The third speaker is Glenn McLeod, Principal at Glenn McLeod Legal, on behalf of Robin and Nicholas Cornish, not in support of the recommendation. Thank you, Mr McLeod. You'll have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor and councillors. I act, as you said, for Robin and Nicholas Cornish. They own the property immediately to the south of Lot 8, 2118 Great Northern Highway. My clients object to the recommendations, as has been said, for 5 reasons. 1, characterisation of the use. The officers have characterised the use based on a previous determination of the State Administrative Tribunal relating to a different development on a different site. This is wrong. There must be a detailed consideration of the proposed use of the applicant's land. In this instance, what actually occurs on Lot 8 is that participants of the program sleep at the site. The majority of the activities undertaken by the participants in the rehabilitation program occurs off the site. The use of Lot 8 is properly characterised, therefore, as residential building. A residential building is a prohibited use in the landscape zone. 2, unregulated rehabilitation facilities, which has already been mentioned. My clients have been informed by Minister Safiotti in a letter that I've seen that the Department of Planning and Lands and Heritage is investigating facilities like this in which rehabilitation and care are provided. In light of this, it is foreseeable that an approved community purpose use on Lot 8 will become a non-conforming use in the short to medium term. To allow this to play out, if there is an approval, it should be a time-limited approval, and we would recommend 18 months. 3, incompatibility with the objectives of the landscape zone. The subject land is zoned landscape under the local scheme. One of the objectives of the zone is to provide for low-density rural residential development and associated rural residential activities, recognising the visual characteristics of the landscape. The locality of the subject site has a very low intensity of development. Therefore, the proposed development is not compatible with the objectives of the zone for 2 reasons. Firstly, it is not a rural residential development, and secondly, it is not a low-density development because of the size and scale of the development and its associated requirements. 4, amenity impacts. The proposed development will result in amenity impacts to the neighbouring properties. Based on the scale of unapproved and unlawful developments currently being carried out on the subject site, it is foreseeable that the proposed development will result in detrimental noise, traffic and visual impact to the future amenity of the area. I note here that the immediate vicinity already has a rehabilitation premises at Lot 7, 1973 Great Northern Highway. The introduction of a further rehabilitation premises has the effect of fundamentally altering the character of the locality. This is at variance with the objectives of the zone. 5, not reasonably capable of operating in accordance with planning controls.
You have 1 minute left, thank you.
Thank you. The applicant has been unlawfully using the site for a considerable period of time. The applicant The applicant's form is poor, and given the intrusion of the use into a quiet rural landscape zone, it is if the application is approved, it should be time limited, as previously mentioned. Conclusion. Councillors, you have a clear choice. You can refuse this development, and I would ask you respectfully to clear your minds of the emotion that has surrounded the matter and make a decision that upholds the integrity of your town planning scheme, in fairness to those who have come into this area in reliance on the stated objectives of the landscape zone. If the council is minded to approve the application, in fairness to those who would be unreasonably impacted by the applicant's non-compliance of conditions, the applicant should effectively be put on probation with a time-limited approval of 18 months. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, councillors? Councillor Johnson first.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, my question is, what's the distance of your client's residence from transportable building number 4 in the plans?
I can't give you the exact distance. I've been to the site and I've seen it. So from my client's premises, the transportable and other amenities or other buildings on the site are clearly can be clearly observed. It's not a great distance, but I can't give you a precise figure.
So is it 10 metres, 100 metres,
Oh,
half
no,
a kilometre?
It's not kilometres and it's not 10 metres. It'd be something like, I would say 100 metres or something in that. 300 metres, I've just been
300
informed.
metres.
Thank you.
And do you think over that distance you'd get, if there was any noise, you would hear it?
Well, it depends on the circumstances, the weather and a whole range of things. But yes,
people-
it's conceivable.
Say people sitting outside singing hymns, would that be a disturbance at a distance of 300 metres?
I don't know. I don't know that that's the issue. It's more outdoor activities on the site that would be the issue, not singing hymns.
Thank you, Councillor Bowman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Glenn. Glenn, you mentioned that because the rehabilitation occurs off-site, they work off-site, it shouldn't be deemed community purpose.
Correct.
What's the difference then between Forest Road and Park Street, where my understanding is that's exactly the same?
Well, my understanding is that the residents of the facility in question go to the other sites. I can't speak about the Forest Road site, but I can. I've got clear. I'm instructed that what happens on a daily basis is that the residents leave this site and come back. So they would go to the nearby facility, the one I've mentioned in Great Northern Highway, and other properties, but they don't spend a lot of time on the applicant's on the property, the subject of the application.
And you also talked about the amenity impacts of the foreseeable future, or the foreseeable. You're a well-respected planning lawyer in WA. Foreseeable, my understanding is when we have an application before us, we can only look at it on the facts and not what may happen. Is there something I'm missing there?
No, you're not missing anything there. But what I'm saying is that if you know that there's change afoot, you have flexibility, and the flexibility is to grant for that reason and other reasons and the other reason that I've mentioned, grant an interim approval to effectively see how this use plays out, and secondly, if the minister has signalled a potential change to the law and an investigation to allow that to play out, rather than endorse a non-conforming, what could become in the near future a non-conforming use. So it's really about using the flexibility that a short-term approval would give you, or a limited time approval would give you, to see how it unfolds.
Councillor McCulloch.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Mr McLeod. Mayor, I'm sorry, I probably should have asked this when Ms Cornish or Mr Van Heemst was speaking, but in relation to those experiences, did you have any more information that you can provide councillors with in regards to that?
I can't, I'm afraid.
Okay, they can be handed out later, thank you. Another question, Councillor Johnson?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I've just got one more question. So what you're saying is that right now it is capable of being approved, in your opinion?
No, well, it is capable
Of being approved. Thank you.
It's potentially, it's capable of being approved. It's your decision. I recommend that you don't approve it for two reasons. One, it's not it's prohibited use, right? Now, if you hold a different view, I say it's a prohibited use because it's a residential building. So let's be clear. If you take a different view and you take the recommendation of the officers, then clearly it's capable of being approved. I'm saying that if you accept that recommendation, you should refuse it on the grounds of amenity. If you don't accept that, then and you approve it, then the reasonable thing to do would be a time-limited approval.
Well, you're saying it can't be approved because it's residential, but is there not an existing residence on the site?
There is.
What it says here.
Yes, that's correct, but it's a single residence. It's going to be. It's the character of its use is going to be changed because it's going to fall into the definition of residential building. Now, the definition of residential building is in the. I'll just tell you what that is because it's quite important here. Residential building. Sorry. Right. Is a building or portion of a building together with rooms and outbuildings separate from such building but incidental thereto, such building being used or intended, adapted or designed to be used for the purposes of human habitation temporarily by one or more persons or permanently by seven or more persons. So you see, the thing is that because of the number of people who would be using the building, its character changes to a residential building. That's our submission.
Thank you, Councillor Catalano.
Yes, thanks. I just wanted a little bit more information about that proposed change to the use that you say the ministers. Which is it? Is it the special purpose use that's going to be that she's flagged for changes?
That could be the outcome, or it could be simply that the circumstances in which a community purpose use of this nature would be allowed would be more specifically defined to require that it be consistent with the zoning of a site like this, where the zoning is landscape, rural landscape, and is a zoning that never contemplated in the first place a use of this intensity and character adjacent to in the quiet amenity that persists. So it'll that's what I expect. We haven't seen the detail yet from the minister's inquiry, but that's what I expect.
Yeah, okay, that's great. Thanks.
Councillor Johnson.
Just another question. Shouldn't this council be applying the law as it stands now?
That's what I'm recommending.
Thank you.
Being no further questions, I thank you for your attendance, your
Thank you.
deputation and answering those questions. The next speaker is Mr Martin Flint, Director of Flint Legal, on behalf of Shillong Group.
Thank you, Mayor and Councillors.
Thank you. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor. I act for Shalom in this matter and have done so for probably close to 5 years. You hopefully will have received my written deputation today. I just want to summarise that, and then perhaps deal quickly with matters that have been raised, and then invite questions. So first of all, I commend to you the comprehensive agenda report of the officers recommending approval. As has been noted, since the previous time this matter was before the council, we've removed 2 transportable dwellings with a consequential decrease in the number of women from 36 to 24. In my written deputation, I've set out some matters that I've called learnings from the previous SAT decisions, and I've been involved in all of those, so not only can I read the decisions, but I know firsthand. Firstly, the use for which approval is sought is that of community purpose. That is beyond doubt. There is no issue about that. I'm happy to answer questions. Nothing I've heard tonight alters that at all. The use is exactly the same as Park Street, which was the subject, which was the determination where the tribunal found it to be community purpose. In the tribunal appeal that dealt with ultimately granting approval for the Park Street and Forest Road properties, there had been a 4-year period in which those properties had been operating pursuant to the program. So the tribunal had the benefit of evidence, despite what other people have said today, of a whole range of witnesses, factual and otherwise. Some of the things that the tribunal said, I should say too that in those proceedings there were all sorts of allegations made against Shalom of the nature that you heard tonight. Of course, Shalom's not on trial, nor is Mr. Lyndon James, but the tribunal didn't accept any of them. The tribunal went on to say that Shalom's program is unusual in its ability to control the behaviour of its participants, and it made reference to the evidence of the then Commissioner of Police, Chris Dawson, now the Governor of this state, who gave evidence to assist the tribunal. In respect of the programs and the issues in relation to each site, the tribunal found that there was no credible risk of antisocial or criminal behaviour, no adverse impact on amenity of locality. This is with the program running for 4 years. This is not prospective or speculative. The tribunal found that there was significant community benefit which weighs in favour of approval. And, not insignificantly, on the previous occasion the city's officers had recommended approval, with which the tribunal agreed. Again, the officers have recommended approval. Of course, there is the possibility of further development in the future, but as I put in my written deputation, that is irrelevant to the consideration of this application. That'll be determined at that time. That can't be taken into account in this application. As to the commencement of the use, I've explained in the written deputation the circumstances whereby that came about, but there's no doubt that the council can grant a retrospective approval, and the fact that the use was commenced without approval is not relevant for the purposes of this application. There are other things that can be done as a consequence of that, and the city's pursuing them. But in terms of whether or not to grant approval here, the fact that the use has been commenced is not relevant. As a matter of law, that can't be clearer. In terms of what other people have said, obviously I don't know the answers to the factual allegations, but Mr. Lyndon James nor Shalom is on trial. Shalom has not received any offer for purchase, so we're not, at this stage, our position is that we're seeking an approval, not a time
You have 1 minute left, thank you.
Not a time-limited approval. I obviously disagree with Mr. McLeod about it being a residential building. As to the possibility that the Minister may change the law in the future, that is so vague as to not be relevant. Amenity impacts I've already dealt with. The tribunal, in an exhaustive decision, analysed the evidence it had before it, and in terms of an allegation that it's not capable of compliance, well, we reject that as a matter of fact, and in any event, it's irrelevant. The fact that it was retrospective, there is the power to prove retrospectively. And as I say, I'm happy to assist the council with any questions you might have.
Thank you very much for your deputation. Questions, councillors? Councillor Bowman.
Thank you for that. Park Street, Forest Road, you say that it's the same. Am I correct that there was the approved use of Park Street was 3 group dwellings, Forest Road was 2 group dwellings, and lot 8 is only a single dwelling. So would that, in that fact, make it different?
I'm talking about the program. Yes, I accept that in terms of the structures that are there, but in terms of the program and the evidence, how it's carried out, allegations of impacts upon amenity, that is still applicable. But yes, there were different approvals, but the findings are very much relevant.
You touched in your written deputation, and because I was the one that asked the question, I asked the question of the CEO of Shalom House at a tour of his property, where a number of other councils were present, about relocating everything into the middle of the property to have less of an impact, especially to the northern neighbour. The response I got, and don't want to quote, but it was basically he'd do anything, and if that was the case, he would. Now it appears doesn't want to. Is there a reason behind that?
I'm not aware.
Okay.
I should say that of course is not relevant, but if there was a reason, I'd tell you. I don't know. The chair of the board says he can answer that, Mr. Price.
And what's your thoughts on the suggestions that I've heard tonight about a period approval of 18 months?
Well, firstly, I think there appear to be put forward a couple of reasons. One, the suggestion that there might be an offer, or that we haven't seen such an offer, but obviously that's not relevant as a planning consideration, so we can put that to one side. The possibility that the law might change in the future, that always applies. And it's so vague. No disrespect to Mr. McLeod, who I have a lot of respect for, but that can't be taken into account. This is an unusual... The first time round, Park Street and Forest Road were unusual circumstances because you had a land use which understandably might generate concern. But you had 4 years of operation whereby there'd been literally no trouble. No police attendance. The Commissioner of Police was prepared to come along and give evidence about how unusual he found their compliance, control of behaviour, etc., having dealt with people who were addicts. So we would say that you have all the material to be able to make a determination, not tonight obviously, but approving the matter per se, that there's no need for a probationary period, as someone called it.
So the CEO of Shalom, actually in his original request, said he only wanted a 3-year approval. Has that now changed?
I believe so. I haven't heard anything. I'm not aware of that.
Okay. And finally, you talk about, and I understand it's not a planning item, but you've raised it as well, that it hasn't been an offer. Are you using that from a purely legal term? Because I've been at a meeting where there was discussion about a sale. I agree it wasn't in a offer and acceptance form, but it seems like it was a pretty good start of negotiations. So are you denying that, or are you saying that it's just not in the legal term what an offer is?
You'll have to ask Mr. Price about that. I haven't been involved in any of that. I don't have any factual understanding. I've simply been told that there's been no offer.
Okay.
So whether there's anything more to it. But I can only make the point again that as a planning, it is simply not a planning consideration. You'll never find a tribunal making a decision by reference to the possibility that someone else...
I understand. I preference that to start with, but because
Certainly,
it was raised, I wanted to clarify.
But Mr. Price can...
Okay, thank you.
Price can assist there.
Any other questions of Mr. Flint, councillors? Then I thank you for your attendance, your deputation, and the questions answered. The next in-person presenter is Mr. Michael Price, Chairman of the Board of the Shillong Group. Thank you, Mr. Price. You'll have 5 minutes to make your deputation.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors. My name is Michael Price, and I'm the Chairman of the Board for Shillong Group. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening in relation to our planning approval request. Shillong undertakes important work for our society. We take in people who are in the grip of life-controlling issues and substances to work to treat these issues, as well as the underlying trauma that has often led to their current situation. We also resolve their debts, get them linked into society, including identity requirements, and train them with new skills. All this with the purpose of restoring relationships and with the goal of them being meaningful participants in the community over the long term. Over the last couple of years, our program has expanded to include a women's component that is now starting to grow significantly, and we require additional accommodation. Some of these women have already transformed their lives sufficiently that they are now able to be reunited and take care of their children again, which is a significant step forward for them. The Shalom program is a disciplined and long-term program. We hold our residents to a high standard of behaviour and have clear expectations if they wish to remain in the program. For our program to work effectively, we need our various facilities to be in reasonable proximity to each other, as well as services and amenities. As we are going through this period of growth and development, we acknowledge we are facing challenges in sourcing new facilities and getting all the required approvals in place in a timely fashion. We are refining it to balance our longer-term strategy. We're considering several scenarios, trying to define a future development in a more structured manner. We would also, as we submit those approvals, request that the City of Swan consider those approvals in a timely manner. In order to move from a reactive situation to a more proactive one, we are open to engaging with the City of Swan on our strategy and receive appropriate feedback as we move forward. We've also recently engaged with our closest neighbour to the Women's Block and are working with him to resolve concerns where possible. This discussion has acknowledged that there have been no substantive issues with the residents and their behaviour on the property. We acknowledge there have been some concern raised in relation to one of our 7 properties, but we don't consider these relevant to the planning approval requested for this property. I hope you will appropriately consider and then grant our approval request. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Bowman, you're first.
Mr Mayor, probably just follow on from my other questions. Mike, you heard tonight about suggestion of 18 months approval. What's your views on that one, especially noting that the original request, the CEO indicated that he'd be happy with a 3-year approval period?
I can't comment on that initial request for 3 years, but our request is for an approval.
Okay, so in the written application to the city, it actually has in there about a 3-year period he was satisfied with.
Okay, I'll have to take that question away but our request is for an approval of the, not a time-bound approval.
So it's changed from the original request. I'll ask the staff. Will there be a caretaker living on site?
Yes.
Where will they be living, considering the original submission, the transportable was going to be the caretakers?
That's still the intent.
So if that's the intent, that the caretaker will be living in the transportable, where's the other 6 women going to be living? Noting there's 18 in the house, there's 1 transportable for the caretaker, but my understanding is that has now been changed in this application to 6 women, so I don't know where the caretaker is going to be living. So you're saying the caretaker will be living in that transportable, and if that's the case, where's the extra 6 women going to be?
I'll have to take that away.
When I met with you a while ago, there was discussion about the other transportable building and about being a laundry room, and you indicated no, it's a storeroom. Is that still the case? It's a storeroom?
Yeah.
So are you aware, I've been advised that washing machines are being moved in there of late? So now I'm a little bit confused. Is it a storeroom, or is it a washing room, or is it both?
My understanding is it's a storeroom. I wasn't aware that the use of it had changed.
Okay. And final question, right now, how many women are currently living on site?
I'm not sure right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? Then thank you for your attendance tonight and your deputation. Before we go into providing the written deputations, Councillor Johnson's got a question of staff. Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. My question, Mr Mayor, through you to Mr Russell, is to what extent should Council take into account the statements made by Ms Cornish, which were really kind of quite emotive and negative and not really relating to planning matters?
Mr Russell.
Through Mr Mayor, if I heard Ms Cornish correct, the allegations were that a member of the public, not an occupant of 2118, a member of the public supposedly made some abusive comments towards it, which could be inferred as being as a result of allegedly Facebook posts. So, whilst that, if true, could be considered to be most unfortunate, it has not got any direct relationship with the application that we have in front of us. It's part of, I think, what you've heard this evening, the sorry facts around the divided nature of the relationship between Shalom's operations in this part of Bullsbrook and the community, and they are what they are.
Councillor Bowman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have a few questions. The current transportable, did this replace a previous building?
I'm not in a position to answer that. What they've applied for is what they've applied for. The application hasn't indicated that any particular transportables are proposing to replace any other structures on the site.
So, Mr Mayor, let me rephrase that question. On a tour that a number of councillors took, where I toured and I was the only councillor that went into the transportable, I was advised it was put there because it was using current septic system from a previous building. Are the current septic systems approved septics? Because my understanding is you get put septics in, you require approval from the city. The application is suggesting they would use those current septics. So one was the previous building, approved building, and if it wasn't, are the septics approved?
Through Mr Mayor, what you'll tend to find, and this property would be no different, there are many historic properties in the city of Swan, or if we go back to the past, the Shire of Swan, that have been there since day dot, and there are no records of approvals. Mr Mayor, it's a fact that this local government doesn't have records of building permits predating 1980. And I've never seen a planning document predating 1966. That doesn't mean that there weren't at some point in time records. So the answer to Councillor Bowman's first question is I don't know. The answer to the second question is, which is clearly in the report, the number of women proposed to occupy these buildings will absolutely require an upgrade to the system, on-site effluent disposal system, and the report clearly acknowledges that and makes a finding as to the capacity for that to occur.
Mr Mayor, my next question is about the public advertising we undertook, the city undertook in the second round, the amended application. How was it done? Was it the same as the initial advertising, which was written notifications to all properties within 500 metres of subject light, a new sign on site and in the newspaper, or was it done differently?
Through Mr Mayor, my recollection is that we wrote to, or we directly notified the very same properties that were notified the first time. I don't believe necessarily that it was the placement of a sign on site, the amended plans or other forms of advertising, but it was a written notification to the original landowners consulted originally.
Mr Mayor, my next question is, are we capable of getting a breakdown of submissions received for and against the proposal? How many were within 500 metres of property, how many were within the City of Swan, and how many outside the City of Swan?
Through Mr Mayor, yes.
The approval, if, as per the officer's recommendation, I just want to get this in my mind, if it's for community purposes, is it for the whole property or is it restricted only to the house and the transportable?
Mr Mayor, it applies to the whole of the land to which the approval is sought.
And Mr Mayor, my next question, and I asked that last time, so I'm going to ask it again. The recommendation for officers is not a retrospective application. Why is it not a retrospective application? My limited planning knowledge would indicate that if something's already started or built, that it's retrospective, and does that change anything?
Through Mr Mayor, plainly the application has been submitted subsequent to the use occurring on the land. Some time ago the city had to be very careful in the way that it used the terms retrospective. And you may say it's a retrospective application for planning approval rather than a application for retrospective approval, which has the very unfortunate connotation of making something that was previously unlawful, lawful right back to the time of commencement rather than the time in which the approval is issued. And that has the very unfortunate implication, and the unintended implication of stymieing in courts the prosecution proceedings that the city had sought to take for respect to unlawful development. So this is a retrospective application for existing use. It doesn't mean the approval is retrospective approval back to the time in which it first commenced unlawfully, if I can make that very important distinction, Mr Mayor.
Recommendation 7 states development shall be connected to an on-site effluent system, but doesn't provide a time frame. Why? And should this be included, noting the Department's health states septic tanks are not suitable for location?
Through Mr Mayor, if the Council's mindful to tighten up some of the conditions, and I could well see that it might be, yes, it can be indicated in terms of a time frame to connect up to that. What I should say, though, however, was that's a separate approval. Any commercial effluent disposal systems that have to be approved by the Department of Health, it may well be a condition that the city can't readily put a time frame on because we're not certain how long it might take the applicant to do it. So you could, but you'd have to be careful around the way that you'd constructed the time frames. And of course, if you grant an approval and any conditions, or the applicants agree by any such condition, they of course have a right to review where the veracity of putting any time frames, given what I've just said, would be examined.
And Mr Mayor, my next question, can you just have officers, staff confirm, in the original application, did the CEO advise in writing, because I've read it, that he would accept an approved condition imposing a time frame?
Mr Mayor, I'll provide confirmation of that before next Wednesday's meeting. I haven't got the documents because they're not in the attachment at the moment.
And Mr Mayor, my final one, should there be consideration, or should we not consider, this, when we consider this application, into what the Department of Planning is currently undertaking, which is reviewing and modifying existing model land uses and definition. So I suppose my question is, when we have a policy that we're advertising, we then have to entertain that, although we haven't adopted it. Is that the same for this, or it's not that far advanced?
Through Mr Mayor, I'll echo Mr Flint's comments, and I agree. It's speculation as to whether or not a law might change. And if I can go one step further with some practical observations over the period, it takes the government and it takes the Department of Planning, as we would well know, quite some time to change some of the planning instruments, particularly if it's looking at changing regulations. So I would say, from where the Council is sitting with a requirement to consider a determination on this application by next week, it is a moot point, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? Then thank you. And you'll note we've also received written deputations on the same item from 4 people, being Sarah Van Hemst, Robin Cornish, Troy Van Hemst and Martin Flint. That takes us to Part B of the agenda, and item 2.2, draft Guildford Mandoon Heritage Area Local Planning Policy and a request to adopt. It's on page 61 of your agenda. And the first in-person deputations, Mr Andrew Minogue from the Guildford Historical Society. Thank you, Andrew. Come to the microphone. It's already on. You have 5 minutes for your deputation.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity for speaking. As some that may not know me, my name's Andrew Minogue, and I've been the President of Swan Guildford Historical Society, and our group being nominated as a key stakeholder. I just want to touch on a few key points. I know it's a large document, but there may need some clarity around involvement and where some of the ideas come. So I will not go all the way back to 2020. Around 2020, during the first workshop, there was a discussion around contributory places, and there was some angst amongst the community, or our key stakeholder group, about those. So what we had offered to the city and the planning staff was to identify and confirm each of the contributory places, over 800 which we had on records. We also went back and confirmed the structure, location, status, year, build and streetscape. So therefore, we would independently confirming contributory places right up to 1945, and we also worked out the percentages in the character statement areas. What that allowed everyone to do is to understand what we're dealing with. This information's usually been kept by a few parties, but allowed us to release the records and to put it in a planning format that was understandable to all parties, and we presented the information previously to this council at a briefing. And now it's accurate, and it was no cost to the city. Our character statements, why are they important? Guildford is diverse, 1829 right to this present day, and the period that's important is 1829 to 1945. So how do we deal with that? How do we deal with some parts of Guildford having the most beautiful workers' cottages to palatial two-storey residences down in Market Street? How do we do that? We do it in character. We don't break it up. It's in the group. We suggested character. And that was from the first workshop, one member from Transition Town Guildford, and Celia Miller had actually came with the idea of why. What character statements does, it creates basically a simple guide to your area and why you like it. Character's always been involved in the battle in any planning application for my time, in my short time being involved. Gives existing residents the ability to understand that the character, why they love their street and protecting their rights. It gives new owners a very simple guide to the character of their area, which they've already viewed from a streetscape point of view, and therefore also with the flexibility of the way the policy is written. Guildford's built form is diverse, to workers' cottage and to big, beautiful, large homes as discussed. The policy is well laid out with simple wording, pictures and diagrams. It's not stuck away in the back of a computer. You can reference your area. You move that into that area for a reason, and you can reference what you can do. Every planning battle in Guildford I've heard and is run is about character. This brings at forefront of what people talk about. This development will ruin the character of the area. These statements will allow that to be seen on accurate data, and that you'll know straight away we can attempt to deal with it without bringing it to the chamber. The data from the stakeholder group is accessible to all. So we've presented it so you can work out which place is pre-45 and not. There is, we acknowledge, an argument around the house might have been 1860 and the addition was 1880 with the same records. That was the main thing with the document. In terms of character statement areas, there is a document from 1981 which is in the city's possession that gave that idea of character areas and statements and precincts. Swan Guildford Historical Society asks you to support the document and the policy.
You have 1 minute left, thank you.
No, that's me.
Well done. Questions, councillors? Councillor Bowman.
Hopefully I can answer it.
Thank you, and thanks for the deputation. I noticed that the majority of the submitters had concerns with the application of the policy. Is that a concern that you share?
No, okay. And not from Celia Miller either, and we've sat in on every single one since 2020, and officers... I want to answer this question in a certain way. Some of the officers are here tonight where there was a lot of angst at the start about this, and we actually, I'll give you one episode, we actually removed ourselves from the process because we wanted to go back and check how we felt about this data. Officers gave us 10 weeks to put that information together. So it has been a to and fro. There's been numerous amounts of workshops, and there's been changes to the statement, and some of the percentages are really high. But we don't want to develop some parts of Guildford the way others look. You can't jam big two-storey homes in Station Street. No way. People have got rights, but we're up to $1 million. And you've got to balance it, and I think this document does it. And I sat and listened to a lot of the old policy, and I don't think it suits. That's just our opinion.
Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thanks very much for your deputation on this. The Guildford Association doesn't support up to 1945. How is there a discretion between the two societies then? So
yep, no, that's a fair point. Guildford is more preferenced around a 19th century town. So our concern is, if that's what we say, are we going to knock everything down 1910 afterwards, 1910 to 1945? it's part of the significant statement. There's a lot of critical houses in there. What are we going to do with the Anzac houses? What do we do with that interwar period? The line has to be drawn somewhere, and yes, there is some differences. But 1945 is in the statement, and you go through and you pick that apart from 1910 up. I reckon that we'd have the same people back here at this council meeting fighting for those houses, and you know what? We'd be joining them shoulder to shoulder. But it is important, part of the policy, the 19th century component of that.
So then, if one community group who has one view
Yep.
supports that particular view, and the Historical Society supports another period,
Yep.
being that key period which is integral to Guildford, which is that 19th century period.
Yep, it absolutely
not
is.
up to 1945. That is the vision and the format
Yep.
of basing the decisions and the format of Guildford.
Yep.
That there is a big difference between the two views.
Well, we agree everything up to 1910. So from 1829 to 1910, there's no misstep, and I think that there has to be an absolute argument. There's a lot of groups outside it, and the town is the most intact town of first settlement. And 1945, up to 1945, there's a significance around the Light Horse and a few other items of significant events, and I think people who live in houses in Guildford between 1910 and 1945 would also beg to give it. Like, we could knock them down, but you knock about take 50% of them out.
No one's suggesting that they knock them down. They're
Right.
just identifying that absolute key period is 1829 to 1910.
Yeah, it's a key period, but we also believe up to 1945 as well.
So what I'm just highlighting here is that we have a discretion between two significant groups in the town.
One discretion.
If you have a question, Councillor Richardson, almost a debate going on. So, any other questions, councillors? Then thank you for your time, Andrew, and your deputation.
All right. Thank you so much for all the questions too.
The next in-person deputation is Mr. Stephen Chung, not supporting the recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Chung. You'll have 5 minutes to make your deputation.
Yeah. Good evening, City of Swan. Thank you, Mayor Lucas, and all the councillors for providing me the opportunity to speak and for taking the time to consider the pertinent issues of question that I'm aimed to address in this deputation. My name is Stefan Chung, and I will be speaking on behalf of my father, Jay Chung, who is the owner of the Rusty Old Boat, located at 127 James Street. Could I ask the clerk to pass around some documents that I prepared for the council members? Thank you, Russell. Just one of each, please, sir. Thank you. That just helps guide you guys along with my deputation, and also provides you of a heritage report that we've enlisted the services of a historian. I'll continue my deputation as that passes around. I note that section M811.2.6 of the new draft policy states pylon, digital, neon, or internally illuminated signage shall not be supported unless it can be demonstrated that there is a precedent based on the subject's place's contributory area of development. This implementation of this section in the new draft policy will directly affect my father's existing Rusty Old Boat shop sign, and for this reason, we object to the proposal. I also note that the implementation of this section will result in an inconsistency with the historical era of the cultural monument that Guildford has been preserving. Could I please direct all council members to Appendix 1, page 2 of the deputation document that I've passed around. In Appendix 1, you will see a picture of the Regent Theatre. My father enlisted the services of an accredited historian, Hawking Heritage, who found that the Regent Theatre used a large incandescent illuminated signage. The theatre opened in 1926, next door to where the Rusty Old Boat is now. As seen in Appendix 1, the evidence indicates existence of illuminated signages in Guildford. As such, we propose amending or removing Section M81126 to ensure that our local community maintains a connection with the past through the preservation of our heritage and historical monuments. Could I now please direct you to turn to page 3, Appendix 2. Appendix 2 shows other illuminated commercial shop signs that are currently installed around the Guildford region. Accordingly, the language and wording elucidated in section M811.26 illustrated that certain illuminated signs will be permitted, whilst others do not pass the required threshold. We note that illuminated signs are an influential tool that is visually appealing to customers and enhances business prospects. As such, the implementation of this section will disadvantage many business owners in the Guildford region, including my father's. We humbly seek that the City of Swan amends or redacts the proposed interpretation of section M811.26. We suggest the following amendments to the section. Either 1, amend M811.26 to allow internally illuminated signs, or amend M811.2.6 to remove any exceptions that allow any and all internally illuminated signs. That way, there will be a fair and even application of the rules, and no business will have a commercial advantage over any others. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. Question, Councillor Bowman.
Thanks for that, Mr Mayor. So, taking on board that you don't like the illuminated signs part of the policy, what's your views on the rest of the policy? Are you happy with that?
Very happy.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, councillors? Then I thank you for your attendance, your deputation, and the provision of the attendances.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. That now takes us to the next item. It's item 4.2, the RA report for proposed childcare premises at Lot 42, 114 Farrell Road, Midvale. It's on page 519 of your agenda. Oh, sorry, that's a written deputation from Nardine Lewis. The next item is item 4.5, proposed shed in Rambler Close in South Guildford on page 597. There are 2 written deputations, one from McGarry and Judy Holland, and a further deputation from Melanie and Sean Rapatoni. Then the next item is item 4.6, to use a portion of parking bays as storage area for tyres at lot 2039 Resource Way, Malaga on page 610. There's an in-person deputation from Mr Mark Waller from 4M Waste, not in support of the recommendation. Mark here. Thank you, Mark. If you can come to the microphone, you have 5 minutes to give your deputation. Thank you.
Thank you. That's actually in support of the proposal there, sorry.
Oh, it's in support?
There.
Fine.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for hearing me out this evening. My name's Mark Waller. I'm a director and owner of 4M Waste, who is a tenant of 39 Resource Way. We've been there over a year now. We have a works order from DWER to construct our operation to recycle tyres. We run a fully automated plant and only have 6 staff at the premises, and as such don't need 23 parking spots that are currently contained in the plans. So we request to reduce that down to 8 parking spots, and the use change to general industrial. We previously run a tyre recycling business at 15A Mulgore Road, Malaga. Went through a similar process. We relocated the business so we could scale up the size of the business to a bigger business. We are quite a small operation. We recycle tyres. Our aim is to recycle about 3,000 tyres a year from that. 3,000 tyres a year from that operation. We separate out the steel and the rubber and then sell those components, creating a waste in, zero waste out facility, providing a full circular economy for waste of tyres in Western Australia. We don't export anything overseas, and we feel as though we do something pretty good for the economy and obviously for society as well. We don't believe changing reducing the number of parking bays is going to impact any of our neighbours or surrounding businesses in the industrial estate that we operate in. And yeah, we're obviously in support of the point.
Okay, thank you. Question, Councillor Bowman.
First question, can I just clarify? The officer's recommendation is to refuse approval.
On what grounds is that?
Well, in the report, it's refuse approval. I take it you are against that, not for the officers.
Oh, sorry. I didn't realise that they were... Yeah, we are against refusing.
Okay.
Yeah.
My next question is, with your licence, how many tyres can you have at that premise?
At any point in time, 500.
Okay, and that's from Dewar, is it?
Dewar, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And fire. Obviously, we see it all the time. An issue. What fire suppression do you have in place?
Yeah, so that's been assessed. We have fire hydrants. There's 3 on the road within 100 metres of the building. We also have a fire hydrant in the warehouse itself. The warehouse is only 700 square metres. We work within the GN02, which is the fire standard for small tyre recycling businesses, which is what we are.
And your licence, is that allow for tyres to be outside, or was that supposed to be all inside?
Outside and inside.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Howlett, you're next.
Thank you very much, Mark. So you mentioned your move to this address was to scale up the operation.
Mm-hmm.
So was it always your intention then to operate the business in the car park areas?
We don't operate the business in the car park areas.
So all this tyre stuff in the car parks, that's not the car park area that's in use at the moment?
No. So there's equipment in the car park area. We store some equipment there, but it's not in use in terms of the actual running of the operation of the business.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Knight.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Yeah, you do a really valuable service, and I totally get that. There are some concerns about the health and the environment and odour and things like that. Tyre-wise, how long would the tyres sit there? Because if they start pooling water, I mean, it could be breeding mozzies and things like that. So
yeah, correct.
Do you cycle it pretty quickly?
Yep, it should flow through every couple of weeks. It should come through basically a process where it comes in and it gets recycled and the rubber goes out.
Okay. Yeah, right, thanks.
Any other questions of Mr. Waller? Councillor Cadwell? Yeah, I've already got one for you. No other questions of the Deputy? Then thank you for your attendance and your deputation. You'll also note there's 2 written deputations, one from Mr. Mike Gray and one from Linda Nichols in support of the recommendation. I've got questions for the staff. Councillor Bowman, you were first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A question to the staff, just going off of what we just were told. On page 619, 621, is that part of the operation that's outside, or is it an open top roof that moves back or something? Because they look like they're outside, but we were told that no part of the operation is outside.
Mr. Mayor, the photographs are pictures taken of the outside car parking area, I believe.
So I'd be right that what I'm seeing is processing of tyres out in the car park. So it's actually in direct opposite of what we were just told.
So I would say, Mr. Mayor.
And next question, Mr. Mayor, would we be able to put a condition on the refusal that there's a time frame for the tyres have to be removed, or is that a compliance issue and not a planning issue?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it is a planning issue. Generally, if this was refused, the first order of business would be that the applicant may have a right of appeal, and so that would have the effect of staying any order that we might make to remove the tyres, and that would allow the normal appeal process to run its course. And if it ran its course, and for example, hypothetically, the refusal was sustained, then we would and could issue a direction giving them a period in which to remove the tyres. That's how it would operate, Mr. Mayor.
And Mr. Mayor, are staff able to advise whether the premises are prescribed premises under Category 56 or 57 of Schedule 1 of the Environmental Protection Regulations 1987?
Through Mr. Mayor, this is a prescribed premises. It is subject, as the report states on page 613, to a works approval and a works licence pursuant to Part 5 of the EP Environmental Protection Act 1986. And as the report says, and we have been advised directly by the Department of Water and Environment Regulation, they are investigating an alleged breach of the terms of that works approval and conditions of its licence.
Thank you. Councillor Catalano, you are next.
I was just wondering about the so the parking bays. The application is for parking bays to be turned into tyre storage. But I just wondered what happens if this particular proponent moves out of that. What happens to that area? How does it go back to being parking bays? Because at some point in the future, I mean, obviously a number of car parking bays were put there to begin with. So, you know, how does it go back to having that same number of car parking bays service that particular building?
Mr. Russell.
Through Mr. Mayor, Council has often dealt with these sort of matters by making or granting a dispensation on the numbers of parking bays required under an approval particular to the nature of the business. And you've heard from the gentleman this evening that indicated that 4M are only operating 6 employees from the site. They don't have any customers. So it may well be, and I'll stress here that the issue of the covering of the car parking bays and the deprivation of the bays for use by people parking isn't the salient issue for us, isn't the pivotal issue. If 4M subsequently moved out, you know, hypothetically the council, if you sorted out all the other issues, environmental issues at the council, if that was all resolved, and the council was mindful to grant the use of the outdoor parking area to 4M for tyre storage, it could make it particular to 4M, and subsequently anyone else moving into the premises would need to make a fresh application or revert to the original approval, because it may well be a different use might need more than the bays that the council ends up granting to 4M. So it would be horses for courses in this instance with respect to any subsequent user of the premises.
Councillor Howlett, you are next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question was for staff, but it's pretty much been answered in Councillor Bowman's question, because it was in relation to this being a retrospective application for an existing use of that car parking area. So it's been covered. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, councillors, on this item for staff? Being no further questions, we move on to the next item. That's item 5.2, tree request removal, or tree removal request, Great Northern Highway. It's on page 692. We have an in-person deputation from Mr. Graham Ukich, part owner of the property, in support of recommendation A and B, not in support of recommendation C. Thank you, Graham. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor and Councillor. Actual fact, I'm not in support of recommendation B. I'll explain in a minute because it becomes irrelevant. Firstly, I'd like to give you a bit of a history. Our family's been growing grapes in the Swan Valley since 1929. Myself and my brother, we are third-generation Vignerons. And over the last 45 years, I've seen the Swan Valley go from having over 60% of the area under vineyard to the sad state of affairs today that we only have 11% of the area of the Swan Valley under vineyards. And that is shrinking every year. In October 2019, we acquired the Hortons property. I'm sure councillors know where that is, which had been owned by Overseas Private Equity Group previously. We renamed it Nicola Estate after our grandfather. And the property now is in local hands for the first time in 7 years. The vineyard was very poorly maintained for a number of years, several years, and it grew probably only 3 varieties, Chardonnay, Chenin Blanc and Modelo, which was used for Horton's White Burgundy, and I imagine some of you would have drunk quite a bit of that at the time. Now, we are starting, well, we hope to start, the largest vineyard replanting program in the Swan Valley in over 25 years. In fact, it's the largest replanting program since we did it ourselves at Oakover 25 years ago when we did over 100 acres. Now, we intend to start planting approximately about 10 acres of variety, and that is the cleared area, with varieties that are going to be suitable for the Swan Valley climate and also for the area, because we have to adapt to change, particularly climate change. Pedro, which is for our fortified program. Grenache, Tempranillo, Fino, which is Italian white, and Grenache, which is a red from the Law Valley. Why I mention those, and this is important to understand, is a case that water is absolute premium out in the Swan Valley. We have a limited water licence, and it's the intention of the Water Resources Department to take 10% of all the water licences in the Swan Valley over the next 4 to 5 years. Water is such a precious commodity that it's a resource that which we've got to try and use most efficiently. Now, you had a report done by an arbitrist whose experience is from the UK. Not many vineyards in the UK. You didn't get a report from a proper qualified viticulturist. As someone with over 40 years' experience as a viticulturist and a qualified viticulturist, I have to be kind what I say here now, because I'm going to say something that I think the Mayor said you've got to be nice about reports written, but I wouldn't care for much what was written on that report. Any viticulturist will tell you trees kill vines. The bigger the tree, the bigger the damage they do. They take out all the nutrients and water from the surrounding area. These trees have destroyed over 2 acres of vines, and every year it will get worse as they grow. It doesn't matter how much water you add or try to add to the area, it will never be sufficient. Bearing in mind, remember, we are losing 10% of our water over the next 5 years, so we have to be really conscious of how much water how we utilise our water licence. Now, from an environmental point of view, 2 acres of vineyard has a far greater carbon capture than 11 trees. Now, we're not against trees. We have planted already over 50 trees on the property over the last 3 years, and we have plans to plant approximately 50 to 100 trees in the next couple of years using the City of Swan Bush Remuneration Guide, which means one of the reasons why I don't need to support point B, because we're more than covering it given our plan. You must understand this is a 370 acre property, and we are planting those trees are planted over 300 metres away from our existing vineyards, so they will have no detrimental effect to our existing vineyards, which is crucial. Now, some key issues brought up in the CEO report. Point 3, the city urban forest plan is totally irrelevant because we are in the Swan Valley agricultural area. We're not in Midland or Guildford.
So you have 1 minute left, thank you.
It does not apply. And I remind you that we're now under the Swan Valley Planning Act, and as chairman of the Swan Valley Strategic Leadership Group, which advises all of government, your point 10 is the importance of ensuring quality agricultural land in the Swan Valley must be retained for horticulture and viticulture. But I'll bring to your attention point 11, which overrides everything that you councillors are going to have to be responsible for. Point 11, where provision of the scheme is inconsistent with local law, the provision of the scheme prevails to the extent of that inconsistency. Basically, part of our role, what we're doing as a group, we haven't got to the councils, is to make certain that all government departments and councils are fully aware of the new Swan Valley Act. I hope you've read that in detail. And I expect the City of Swan to do everything in their power to encourage viticulture in the Swan Valley, because it's a resource that we've got to do everything in our power to help survive. Those trees only existed because the council did not maintain the verge. They came about when they redeveloped the Great Northern Highway. They popped up. The council didn't maintain the verge. They've been allowed to grow over the last 18, 19 years. It's not on our land, but it's affecting our vines, and you only have to go out there to see how they've killed the vines. And it's not so we should not be incurring any costs in relation to this, because because the council had not done its job in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Howlett, you've got a question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Mr Jukic, for your deputation. So, as I recall, when you enter the former Horton property, now at Nicola Estate,
yep.
As you head down that lovely long driveway, to the left is a quite wooded area used to be known as the Wildflower Ridge.
Yes, that's still there.
Yeah, and then as you continue on further down and up the glen and over a range, on the right-hand side there was quite a large established blue gum plantation.
Yes.
Is that still there?
That's still there, but that has been cleared up. That has been cleared up,
yeah.
And substantially reduced. We cleaned out all the deadwood. There's another good example. There was so much deadwood, so we cleaned out 70% of the deadwood.
Thank you. I hadn't finished actually. Yeah.
Okay.
So I just wondering if they still existed. So my question is it your intention then to remove these trees
No.
to protect the water that's so precious for the vines and the
No, because those trees actually use for why those trees were planted. They use for our wastewater treatment plant because they are serviced by all the wastewater from the winery.
And that includes the Wildflower Ridge, which is not... No, that's...
The Wildflower Ridge has got nothing to do with this. This is trees actually on the Great Northern Highway.
Oh, no, I'm aware of that.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the rest of the trees on your property, whether you're keeping those.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, we are planting... In actual fact, we've gone further than that because we've built the amphitheatre down the back and sadly, because of weather conditions, we did not have midnight oil there. But we have got Robbie Williams coming soon. We are planting about 50 to 100 trees in that area but again, that's over 300 metres away from our vineyard, so it doesn't have any detrimental effect on the vines. Now, the water issue only occurs in the vicinity of the root system of the tree. So what happens when a tree gets bigger, the root system expands, it just slowly kills more and more vines around it. Now, these trees are not indigenous, the ones that are on the highway. They are growing massively and they're just slowly killing more vines. Yeah.
And can I ask what trees that you'll be planting then in your amphitheatre? What did you
they'll be, as per your guidance under the Bushland Regeneration guidelines. Our head gardener's going through that and just pick. Now, they'll make certain those trees will be of reasonable size, but they will be more the smaller to medium-sized trees. There will not be ones that will grow massively, and they will be indigenous to the area.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson, you're next.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, Mr Jukic, in your deputation you mentioned that the report we've received from the arborist should be discounted because the arborist is from the UK and there are not a lot of vineyards there. So I just wondered if you knew that there were, I just looked it up, 450 vineyards in the UK and 15 million bottles of wine produced a year there.
Well, that's a drop.
Well, there you go. And they're even making it in Scotland these days. So I just wonder if that changes your view.
No, it doesn't. Look, as a trained viticulturalist, anyone who's run vineyards will tell you you cannot have trees next to vines because of the damage, particularly big trees, what they actually do to that particular area. If it was so good, we'd plant trees at the end of every vineyard row, but we don't.
Yes, the other question is, you mentioned that the trees are not indigenous, but are the vines indigenous?
No, the vines actually are not indigenous, but hold it, this is something that's really important. Either the council supports what we're trying to do for the Swan Valley or they don't. If you don't want to support the Swan Valley, fine, then I'll make the recommendation at next board meeting on Thursday saying, well, we're not going to get the support of the council, then we might as well get rid of the Swan Valley Act and just put it under housing, and then we will be under your urban policy. It's fine. Because the reality is, you've got to understand what is occurring. The Swan Valley is the third most visited tourist area in Perth, behind Kings Park, Rotto and the Swan Valley. And the number one reason why they come is because they love to see vineyards. Now, we represent over 30% of the wine grapes ourselves in the Swan Valley. Now, the reality is, the economics of this, it's far cheaper for me to put a bulldozer through the damn thing, turn it into horse paddocks and just buy the grapes from South West. That's the economics of it. But we are passionate vineyard people. We've been doing it for 90 years. And we see the benefits from a holistic horticulture or viticulture and tourist point of view to actually have the vines. And therefore, and then what we are also doing is that we are rejuvenating and replanting this with varieties that are going to be more suitable from a water usage point of view, but also varieties that are going to be suitable from a tourist point of view. So traditionally what had happened to Hortons, it was just bulk area growing cheap Chardonnay, Shannon, Verdelho for Hortons White Burgundy. That's what the whole 250 acres of vineyard was there. What we're doing, and our plan is to slowly change that mix to varieties that are going to be suitable from a local, domestic and export market of higher value. In other words, we're not going to produce wine that's going to be sold at $7 a bottle. In fact, if you go out to Nicola, our cheapest stuff that we do sell it there is $25 a bottle. And because we're going for that higher-end, high-value product. Yeah. And I highly recommend you all to go out there too.
Thank you. Councillor Bowman, you're next.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So based on your assumption that street trees in the valley adjacent to vineyards can go, so are you suggesting all street trees in the valley that are adjacent to vineyards should be removed, or just the ones next to your vineyard?
No, in actual fact, that would be possibly for all vineyards. In fact, the number of vignerons have been complaining about the problem of those street trees for two reasons. One, the damage to do to their vineyard, and also the amount of birds they attracted. Now, we've had a number of meetings with Alana over the bird problem, and the biggest cause of that is street trees. And it's been a massive issue, and we've got further meetings with the Minister for Agriculture on that issue. So it is a particular problem, actually, large trees that attract birds, etc. But, yeah.
So let me get it right. You support all street trees in the valley adjacent to vineyards being removed?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying it depends where they are located, because it is relative to their location. So if they're right next to it, and it's detrimental to the vigneron, they probably should be removed. If it's further enough away, then they don't need to be removed.
So
because we've only got 11% of the area under vineyard. It's not like we're talking about, and we want to try and maintain that. We're actually trying to grow it. And, and part of the Act is, the number one requirement of the Act is to encourage the growth of viticulture.
So how far away is a reasonable distance for the street trees to be from vineyards?
It's direct proportion to the nature and size of the tree.
So those trees?
They've got to go, because reality is...
It wasn't the question. For those trees, how far away do they need to be from?
They would have to be 40, 50 metres away.
Okay, thank
and
you.
the reason being is for the issue.
He's answered the question.
Okay,
Thank you.
at least 40, 50 metres away.
Councillor Howlett, you had another question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Mr Jukic. With regards to your deputation, and I'm just wondering, do you have the support of the Swan Valley Winemakers Association?
Oh, yeah, most definitely.
Sorry, I haven't finished. And also the Swan Valley Tourism Alliance?
Yes, and the grape growers.
So are they prepared to write a deputation in support of that? I'd like to see that.
We can have that organised and sent to you before the next meeting.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Henderson. Oh, sorry, I didn't see you earlier, but...
Thanks for the deputation, Graham. The area that we're talking about, in particular, is typical clay-type soils?
Correct. Clay, loamy clay.
Loamy clay. So you don't get water flow through that area like you would in normal sand areas?
Definitely not.
So the point is that the water that you get from annual winter, that would sustain part of the growth period?
Yes, it does.
Yes. And then you complement that with watering with your limited water resources?
Correct. And they are essential, because without water you can't grow a commercial crop.
So if the trees consume the water, clearly, as you say, you can't grow the vines there. So that's really the substantive question, isn't it?
But they do, yeah. And it doesn't matter how much water you put in there; they will just chew it up. And look, it's quite evident. It doesn't take rocket science. You only have to go and have a look at it, and you can see how they've just killed the vines, and it's expanding. And it's a direct ratio between size of tree and the vicinity. I mean, it's not rocket science.
So there was some discussion about other areas where there's wooded areas. There's no direct water connection between
there
those
isn't.
areas.
No.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thanks very much for the presentation. I've just got a quick question. If those trees were to be removed, then opposite on page 696 with, I think it's Whistler's Chocolate Company, have got trees directly across the road. What would the...
It's about 40 metres, 40, 50 metres.
So how are you going to remove their trees then?
No, they're sufficiently far enough away. That's the whole
That's
point.
40 to 50 right on the border though.
Yeah, but
because you said 40 to 50 off yours if you were to remove the trees.
No,
So
I'm talking about those trees we've got here. So
if we remove those trees, how
Yes.
close will your vines come to where those trees were when you replant?
within 6-7 metres.
6 or 7. So that will give you the maybe 4.
No, so where we've got where those trees are now,
Mhm.
they are in 6 to 7 metres of our vines. So that's the point. They are in 6 to 7 metres. So if on that property we've already removed one corner, which we aim to replant. Next year our plan is to do the other side, and you'll see the trees are within 6 to 7 metres of the actual vines where those trees are.
Mhm.
So the problem you've got is their vicinity is just too close to the vines. That's the problem.
I just wondered how close up you were going to plant to those original trees, and then
6 to
what
7
would
metres.
the distance be across the road then to those other
Oh,
trees that
be
are...
40, well, you've got the double, it'd be 40, 50 metres. At least 40 odd metres or more. Because you've got the Great Northern Highway, you've got the whole, yeah.
No worries, thanks.
And on top of that, the trees across at Whistler's are tiny. They're not that big. And so it's direct related to the size of the nature of the tree. So when you go across the Whistler's, their trees are substantially smaller. No, always will be.
That's what I was about to ask. What
They
are
always
these
will be because they're at full
species?
maturity. So these are these trees only occurred what happened when they did the Great Northern Highway upgrade. This is where these trees come from, and what do you call it? They've sort of blown in, and because they were allowed to grow, these trees are huge. So they're not small trees. They're big, massive, river gums. They're huge, and that's the problem. So if they were, we've got olive trees which are planted on the verge, which are quite fine because the olive tree is never going to be, it's pruned, it's never going to be large, it doesn't really interfere. It's just the sheer size of these trees that is the problem. If they were only 15-foot trees, I wouldn't be here. But the problem is...
I think you've answered the question. Okay. Thanks, Graham. Councillor Knight, you had a question?
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Graham. How much, if these trees are stay then, how much of your crop would you lose?
We would lose a couple of acres.
What would that be in percentage terms of your...
Oh, relatively small, but we can't afford any acreage loss of it because we've got to make this economically viable, I've got to use and this is also to do about priority agriculture because the other issue too, on that Wildflower Ridge issue, that is actually of sandy, it's why that hasn't been planted because that's of Bassenine sand type soils. So the important part is, and this is we are in the priority agriculture. So the soil type in this area, because it varies on the property, is of the highest quality. So this is where some of our best soils are. So therefore you want to be planting your vines where your best soils are. So you can't go, so what people got to understand, vines, vineyards and that can only be planted where the appropriate soils are. You can't go plant them in, city beach, etc., and useless sand. They just will not grow successfully. So one of the issues we're dealing with the Swan Valley is the Swan Valley is the one region where we can grow successfully high quality vines. We can't do it there's only a few spots we can do it, and this is the only area. That's why the government put a particular Swan Valley Act. That's why we've actually set up a consultancy board to government to help direct all government departments that they've got to comply with the new Act. And I'll re-emphasise point 10 and 11 of the new Act. Ensure quality agricultural land in the Swan Valley is retained for viticulture. And point 11, where there's inconsistency with the local law, the Act overrides it.
But you also said earlier that there's only 11% land.
Yes, sad.
Couldn't you get hold of more land to grow?
Why would I want to go buy other land elsewhere when I have appropriate? I've already got substantial land there, and reality is that's insane. To protect 11 trees that are destroying existing vineyards, and it's also from an appearance point of view because when you're driving out on Great Northern Highway, those trees actually interfering with the visa of all those vineyards. And so from the tourism point of view...
I might disagree with that. I mean, it's...
They do.
You know, I mean, we got to have tree canopy.
I think you've answered the question.
Do you understand...
Thank you. If you have a question, Councillor Knight, please.
Yes. What about salinity? What about some of the things in the report that about the wind, you know, protecting from the wind, easterly winds, the salinity?
No, we do not have any salinity issues actually out there because we're on clay-based soils. Irrelevant. In relation to easterly winds, that is not an issue for us either because of the nature of the vineyard canopy. That's what my point is. You've got a report done by an arbitrist who knows nothing about viticulture.
Okay.
And this is also very important to understand in relation to this, is what we're trying to achieve out there is to encourage viticulture out in Swan Valley. It's a desire of the state government to do whatever they can to encourage that. And I would expect the council to actually...
I think you've made that point.
Just
you
finally.
have another question for me, Councillor Knight? You're next.
B there, offsetting the trees. You're not prepared to do that then?
Well, I can, but what's the point of me doing... I'm doing a whole regeneration program.
That's okay.
But if I have to, I would do it. I would.
You'll cut them down, but you won't plant any more.
Yes, I am. I am planting more. I'm planting another 50 to 100 trees in the next couple of years. I've already planted, somewhere between that number already in the first 3 years of the property. So you've got to understand this whole property. So what we're trying to do is rejuvenate this property. We are, because from an appearance point of view, so I'm not against trees. I'm against trees being in the wrong spot. So as part of our program, I'm going to be planting 5 to 10 times more trees than what's actually going to be pulled out over the next couple of years. But they're going to be put down the back, real close to the river. They'll be appropriate trees, and it'll be 300 metres from my vineyard. So no damage.
Yeah, but these are public trees though. So the recommendation is that it's going to be on public land.
They're right on the verge, on the edge of our...
a city-managed park.
Well, they're not managed. They've just allowed them to
not
grow
those
wild.
trees, but the trees are going to be replaced.
Oh, okay. Well, look, I'm quite happy to agree to doing the 11 additional trees.
No, but it's not even 11. I mean, it's you're talking of...
Well, yeah. Okay. If you have a question, Councillor Knight.
All right.
Councillor Zanino, you are next.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Jukic, your property is located in the priority agricultural zone of the Swan Valley Planning Act.
Correct.
Could you inform us what is the prime objective of the priority agricultural zone of the Swan Valley Planning Act, and also how much damage is done by birds that are attracted by trees?
Massive. The prime objective of the Swan Valley Act, and I hope all of you have read it in detail, is to support and ensure that quality agricultural land, particularly in the prime agriculture area, is retained for horticulture and viticulture, and to encourage that development. That is the prime objective. That's why the government deliberately did a particular act for this to occur. Birds are a massive problem. We've been dealing this with the Department of Agriculture because large trees do attract birds like 28s, cockatoos, etc. And what they do, they pick and peck at with the berries of the grapes, and they actually destroy the economic viability of those actual grapes. Therefore, you can't either harvest those particular grapes. So quite often, we even have vines, rows, where the outside row of the vine is so damaged by birds that we can't even pick it sometimes in a bad year, because depending on the season, you can have bad years where the birds have done so much damage to those particular vines. This is an ongoing problem. The Grape Growers Association have actually got shooters, and we're one of the few spots that allow birds to be shot. They're allowed to under the Agriculture Act. I think last summer something like 1,500 odd birds were shot, but that's not publicly pushed out and known, but to reduce the problem.
Thank you. And Councillor Johnson, you're next.
Mr Mayor, actually the question I was going to ask, I've got an answer to since that. I've got questions of staff though.
Yes. Are there any other questions of Mr Jukic? Councillor Henderson.
Graham, the question was raised about the priority soils.
Correct.
The reason that those priority soils have been, if you like, designated or mapped, does that kind of soil produce particular wine characteristics
Certainly does.
and the like, or is it something you can just grow grapes just about anywhere?
No, you can't. Look, terroir is one of the most essential components of growing good quality, or make good quality wine, or even good quality table grapes. The French use the word terroir, which means the soil. Therefore, that is why vines are grown in the Swan Valley. It's directly related to the soil. Unfortunately, what the soil also does, it causes those damn trees to grow a lot larger than they would normally. Because of the richness in the soil, the trees actually grow a lot larger than, say, they were in Bassendean or in sandy country. That's one of the side effects of actually the better quality soil. So it's absolutely essential, and I can't emphasise why that when you look at areas, so we even go to the point of when we do soil analysis, work out on the property where the best place to actually plant certain varieties of nature of vines, because certain varieties will do better on heavy soils or on lighter soils, etc. So even on our property, because we've got variations of soil types, we actually map out and try and work out where the best place is actually, as part of this rejuvenation program, of where we're going to plant the best parts of actual certain varieties. And yeah.
Okay, I guess the last question is that these high quality soils are quite limited. So
very limited.
So you're saying that even a couple of hectares or acres is critical.
It's critical to our economic viability.
Okay.
I mean, it's been a struggling position as it is. We're doing this because we're taking a long-term view of it. We've been here 3 generations. We've got a 4th generation coming through. But from a pure economic point of view, like I said, I could make more money turning into horse paddocks just to get rid of it all. But that would be horrendous. I'd hate to see that happen to the Swan Valley. And as I said, I hope the council, expect the council to actually comply with the Act. That's all we're asking for you.
Thank you. Councillor Richardson, you had another question?
Oh, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm just looking at some photos of Barossa Valley Way in Europe, which is in the Barossa. That's the street and house, the main road between Europe and Tanunda, where I grew up, where my parents still reside. I'm wondering if that particular side of the vineyard stretch between Europe and Tanunda has trees the entire length way to Tanunda. I'm just having a look again here. And I'm just wondering, and they're probably a setback of about 20 or 30 metres. If those trees, you were successful in removing those trees, would you consider substituting them for a different type of tree in the same position?
Well, there's no point. If you drive along Great Northern Highway, what you've done from a scarping point of view, from the appearance what the council has done, is actually planted olive trees all along the Great Northern Highway on both sides. So what those trees have done is the only spot along that 2-3 kilometre stretch, it's more than that, actual fact, probably 5 kilometre stretch, that the trees are right next to it, because they're actually also damaging the olive trees right there as well. So what you've done, you've actually spent money at the council planting appropriate olive trees, which are not that grow that large, along the side of the roads to make it from a beautiful tourist appearance. And you've got the small batch of these trees that actually even damage your own olive trees as well.
But we're not talking about olive trees.
No, but I'm saying that you wouldn't do it, because from an appearance point of view, it actually from an appearance point of view, it looks a hell of a lot better just to have the olive trees and vines there. Then all of a sudden you've got this small batch of cluster of very large trees, which is totally out of character for the whole scarp going along there. So if you came out there and I'll show you, you can see what I mean.
I'm just having a look at the photo now that I've lived with for quite a few years and looking at
No, I'm talking about out at Great Northern Highway.
But it's the same tourist route as well. Same length of time that the vineyards have been established in the Barossa. Probably less here.
I don't think Barossa Valley Barossa Valley doesn't have a particular act. Barossa Valley isn't in a metropolitan area.
What I'm saying to you is the trees are lined from one suburb to the next, and they are a visual impact of importance.
Richardson.
And I'm asking, would you consider planting a different species of trees where you're removing those trees from?
I will plant trees elsewhere on the property, but not there.
Where is that on the property? To the rear?
To the rear, where 15,000 people go to concerts. We are planting trees on the property, but in appropriate places so to provide shade for when customers come. So we actually are doing a whole beautification program. So the whole property is 370 acres. So what you've got to do is plan this out to get maximum use to make it economically viable, but to have trees in the appropriate spots.
Okay. And the last question I've got quickly is, I've just measured up roughly what 50 metres off that the existing trees would be, and I think it was, did you have an approximate of how many rows you would, if you did a boxed area off those?
It's nearly a couple of acres.
How many rows?
Oh.
Because I've worked out roughly about 8 to 11.
I worked it out in square meterage.
And have you got square meterage on that?
It's about 8,000. It's around nearly 8,000 square metres.
Just from that boxed area?
Yeah,
from one to the other?
no. The area we're repainting of vines is nearly 10 acres.
Yeah, so then if you box an area of 50 metres in from those trees and shorten the length of those rows...
On both sides, I would lose nearly 2 acres.
I'm asking you, that's what I want to know.
Exactly, which would be a disaster.
So how many?
2 acres.
2 acres.
Oh, okay, I'm on fair. I have 0.8 of a hectare, which would be a disaster. No one in their right mind is going to...
I think you've answered the question.
I mean,
thank you.
Councillor Howley, you had a further question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just probably my last question. Mr Yukich, are you a member of the Swan Valley Planning Committee that references the Minister's office and discusses matters relating to the Swan Valley Planning Act?
I'm the chairman of the Swan Valley Strategic Leadership Group that advises the Minister and advises all government departments on matters in relation to the Swan Valley. And this is one of the issues that has been coming up. So the role is to deal with these type of, well, there's a lot bigger issues. Example, to do with anything to do with the Swan Valley, road networks, water resources. And one of the issues we've been dealing with is, unfortunately, with various government departments, and I'll take water resources, where they've just done a blanket 10%, we're just going to do 10% off, not taking into consideration of the viticultures in the Swan Valley. So one of the issues we've been dealing with, and same with the main roads, they're making aware that they now have to comply with the Swan Valley Act. And we just had a meeting last Friday with the Minister and the main roads to do with West One Road and Reed Highway issue. And we're getting that matter resolved to coming up with a better outcome. So our role is actually, that's why Mark McGowan and Rita appointed us to get someone in who can actually get a few things done.
Thank you. So could you just tell me, so you're the chairperson of the Swan
Valley Strategic Leadership Group.
Strategic Leadership Group,
yeah.
Which is a government, a minister-appointed group.
Correct.
And you were appointed as a chairman by the minister?
Correct.
Great. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Any other questions, councillors? Then I thank you for your attendance and answering those questions. I think, if I heard you correctly, I think you mentioned the sum of 1,500 birds, which is 1,500.
Yeah, it's been killed. Yeah.
I think it's closer to 15,000.
Sorry, I think you're right.
I think it's 15,000 birds.
And this
but it doesn't include Corellas, Port Lincoln 28s and Galahs.
It's massive.
It's mainly the introduced rainbow lorikeet, which are an invasive species and not native to Western Australia.
I apologise, Mayor. I got my 10 wrong on that.
No, I just wanted to make sure.
But I think that
we
you
have
must
the correct
understand, because
information.
we've got a number of meetings with the Minister coming up, trying to solve some of these issues.
And would I be correct, because I haven't asked a question, the problem with those trees attracting birds on that stretch of Great Northern Highway is that shooters can't access them to shoot.
You're 100%
because
correct.
it's on the roadway and it's unsafe for the traffic. So
that is 100% correct, Mayor.
Thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. You'll note that there are 8 written deputations also, all not in support of the officer's recommendation, and those names I won't bother to read them out.
Excuse me, just one quick. So if I get the written support...
I think you were asked to provide written support from the Swan Valley Tourism Alliance and the Grape Growers.
Grape Growers and the winemakers. I'll have that. When's your next meeting?
Next Wednesday night.
I'll have that before then.
Thank you very much. Thank you, councillors. You got a question, Councillor Johnson?
Yeah, question for staff.
Yes.
Question for the through you, Mr. Mayor, the acting manager operations. It says in the report that these trees are on the Great Northern Highway side of the property and lie within the main roads WA Road Reserve, within a section which the city has verge maintenance responsibility. So I guess the question I've got is, are we really sure that it's our job to remove these trees? I mean, to me, verge maintenance is about mowing the grass, not about making a capital change like chopping a tree down. So how do we know that we've got jurisdiction over these trees?
Thank you, Mr. Jacowina.
So with the verge maintenance with main roads, it does include tree maintenance as well.
Tree maintenance might involve just sort of pruning them slightly. Does that also include removing a whole row of trees?
So in this circumstance, yes, it would include removing the trees.
And what's the basis for that?
Oh, so there's just an agreement with the city and main roads, and then through that agreement, through, I guess, further practice, it has always been that way that if there is a verge which the city remains and there's a tree that has to be removed, the City of Swan would remove that tree.
So, question, Mr. Mayor, could Council have a copy of that agreement?
If it can be provided, yes. No other questions, councillors? Thank you, Councillor Zanino.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's 8 written deputations that have come forward. My question is, out of the, because they're just names, there's no, out of those 8 written deputations, what involvement or experience do these people have in agricultural or viticultural pursuits?
Well, I can't answer that, and I don't think any.
I'm just saying,
I don't think anyone in this room can answer that.
Well, it's easy for someone just to, if you don't have the right experience that you can comment on something, then you shouldn't really comment at all.
Well, I think everyone's got the right to comment, Councillor Zanino. It's how much weight you put on that when you make your consideration. Okay, thank you, councillors. That completes that item. We now go into Part C, and I've had nothing or nil withdrawn. Now, item 6.3, councillors' questions in regard to other items. I intend to go through the matrix sheet one by one, and hopefully, if we're not delayed too long, we won't need to have a break very shortly. So, item 13.9, community purpose on the Shalom House. Any alternative motions? Councillor Richardson. Thank you. Item 2.1, Community Health and Wellbeing Plan. Item 2.2, the Draft Guildford Mandoon Heritage Local Area Plan. Councillor Howlett, do you know what you're going to do? Okay, thank you. Item 2.3, adoption of the Draft Sustainable Environment Strategy. Councillor Catalano. Yes, well, certainly.
Thank you. The thing that really struck me about the emissions reduction plan was is it 5,000 tonnes of emissions that comes from road construction every year, and that wasn't actually included in the emissions inventory on page 64, and also there were some other, there's another one here on page, it's 417, page 417 and 427. So there's this constant amount of emissions that they talk about, the consultants talk about. So there's no plan for reducing it. And I just wondered why it basically got missed out of all of the graphs, these little round graphs, why it got missed out on the chart on page 419, when this is a constant source of emissions that actually doesn't seem to have any any possibility of reducing if we go to there's a table where we just see that it's here. If we go to page 469, we see that it's just called offset emissions. So I'm gathering then that the emissions are going to continue to come off this road construction sector of what we do, which is quite a substantial amount of emissions. and we're going to continue doing that, and then for some way we're going to get some sort of offset happening. So I just sort of see that as a weakness of the reduction plan.
Thank you.
And I want some clarification on that.
We're going to defer to Mr. Manning. Thank you.
Okay. First of all, I'd answer that question just by saying that it certainly is accounted for in our emissions reporting standard. Currently, in our most recent profile, it represents, now let me just double check, roughly 4% of our total emissions. And that's the graph that you would have in your report. We have squeezed up a lot of those Scope 3 emissions into one consolidated group. A more detailed one is in front of me here, but it is very hard to read because you'll see a whole group of those sort of Scope 3 emissions that are 0%, very small contributions. So we group those really small ones together into Scope 3. You're quite right in saying that it is a difficult emission to reduce, and it's one of those ones that we don't have a clear pathway to reduce other than through blending with, for instance, other products. And Steve may know a little bit more about this than I do, but certainly there's a push to start blending asphalt with other products to reduce its emissions. That is a current topic of debate in the construction industry, but there is movement happening around doing that. But there's a limit to how far you can go with that, and we, particularly in regards to concrete, there's work to be done in that industry to reduce their carbon intensity, and there is certainly evidence of that beginning, but it's going to be a long-term process, and probably very closely linked to the hydrogen industry, I would think.
Okay. So just let's get back to then this emissions inventory graph on page 417. What have you bundled the roads into then, out of those categories?
I think it's listed as assorted Scope 3 or something like.
Which one is it?
We've bundled a lot of the Scope 3, the smaller Scope 3 ones together.
Into which I just can't see which one it is. Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to get this clarified.
Right, sorry. So the one that you're looking at is
page 417, and then it also is repeated on 427.
Yep,
and then the table on 419 doesn't mention it either.
In terms of the table on page 419, it's very much linked into, now I've just got to find the right one, the sustainable infrastructure policies. It's implied within that approach that we would be looking at things like blending of waste products into asphalt, etc., through that policy. That's very much what that policy will be about.
All right. So anyway, we don't have an answer for that about the emissions inventory graph?
It's to the best of my understanding, it was factored into the emissions profile that the consultant did for us, and I don't have it in front of me.
Maybe you could get that one back to me.
I certainly
can. Just take it on notice.
That's great. If you could get that back to me, that'd be great, just so I know. Now, the other thing is, it says here that on page 332 that the City of Swan has a vastly different emission other places have a vastly different emission profile to the City of Swan, but doesn't explain what that difference is or how that difference is. What's the point of difference between the City of Swan and every other local government authority?
I think every local government is different in terms of its emission profile, and I guess it's just meant as a warning against comparing yourself to another local government and expecting that your profile and your targets and things like that should always be the same. It's an individual thing.
Okay.
Our land size is different to a lot of other places, therefore the amount of transport fuel that we use is very different to other local governments. The amount of roads that we need to build is different because of our geographic size. So it's just really just saying that you have to look at our emissions profile and then work out the pathways for reduction for our emissions profile. And it's, as I said, just a warning not to compare yourself to others.
Yeah, I just wanted a bit more information as to what the difference was.
Well,
I
think our
got the bit
geographic
about
size is the biggest
geographic
difference.
size.
Others, the fact that we deliver services in-house is another difference. There are other local governments that choose not to do that. There are multiple different reasons why we are different to any other local government.
Yeah, well, okay. The other thing is, if the roads are going to be this big and like point of emission for the city, and the local government, like the City of Swan, is going to construct these roads and it's going to create these emissions, pollution, I guess, really at the end of the day, because it's not just CO2, it's a number of gases. If you're talking about net zero.
Yeah.
The thing I wanted to, where in these 6, because you talk about these 6 points on page 331, water efficiency, water quality, as part of the sustainable environment strategy. Where's the bit about getting people into public transport and not using roads for vehicles? Because at the end of the day, the roads are causing emissions, are creating emissions, or creating a high level of emissions that we have to offset down the track. That's going to cost us. It's creating congestion, and it doesn't matter whether the vehicles eventually are hydrogen or whether they're electric. It's still a big emitting factor. So where can we fit into this strategy something to do with public transport? Or how can we as a council start looking at how we don't have to build so many roads?
Through the Mayor, I would just point out that this is a corporate emissions approach. So it doesn't extend to the way that we support our community to use public transport, etc. We certainly do that, but it's not part of this strategy. There are a number of things that we do as an organisation to encourage our employees to come by alternative transport. That's our approach to doing this.
Okay, but could this strategy be involved in that? Could that sort of whether it's an advocacy, whether it's actually even some other problem-solving way of getting public transport into the City of Swan, could that be included in this sustainable environment strategy?
Mr. Van Lien?
Sorry, if I may. In terms of what the city controls, if you look on page 331, the bit that fits in with that is the implementation of the cycle plan and the carbon reduction. And then in terms of facilitating public transport, that will fit in more so in our transport strategy, which is part of our broader strategies that determine how we plan and what we do. As Jeremy has said, this sustainable environmental strategy in regards to the carbon reduction it's things that's under the control of the city as an organisation. If I may, Mr. Mayor, also with regards to Councillor Catalano's previous question, if you look on page 333, that figure 1 there, and I remember I've actually asked the same question to Jeremy, and we've included that note there under figure 1 to specify what the other scope 3 emissions profile referred to. So that explains what is included, and you'll see the asphalt and concrete is mentioned there, and that is reflected in
Which
that
one's
figure.
that? Sorry, I don't get.
Figure 1 on
3.
page
Which one?
333.
Oh, okay. Yep. Okay, there. It's in there. All right. Okay. Well, I'll be making some amendments to it.
That's fine.
Yes, thanks.
And it's always helpful if the staff are pre-warned about the question so they can have the answers readily at hand. Item 4.1, Responsible Authority Report for a proposed vehicle showroom in Converse Loop, Ellenbrook. Yes, thank you, Councillor Bowman.
Just a couple of questions. With Conserve Loop being pretty well a parking lot these days, is that considered with this application? And also the fact that Lock Loop is a one-way street and therefore there's going to be increasing traffic. Were safety measures looked at for this application?
Mr. Russell?
Through Mr Mayor, the short answer to that is yes. The development traffic is a factor of assessment and consideration in the application.
And were a staff engineering department satisfied that it's not going to create any further problems to the almost parking lot on Conserve Loop?
Through Mr Mayor, yes, we're satisfied that well, as far as we can be there, like everything else, we're satisfied that the applicant has provided enough car parking on the site. Whether people choose to, of their own volition, park on the road is a matter that is, as we know, can't necessarily be predetermined. That becomes a parking enforcement issue. But we're satisfied the application has sufficient parking as far as the scheme goes. The parking standards go for this site, yes.
So, Mr Mayor, that brings me to my next question about parking. The plans show the parking like a huge Tetris board. Is parking allowed for like that, or are there standards that must be applied? And like I noticed, we've got cars parked this way, and that way, which you couldn't get out unless you move 4. Is there a requirement that what is a parking bay and what is a piece of land that you just put a picture on?
Through Mr Mayor, short answer is yes, there is Australian standards with respect to the design of a car parking area. I think what's important to note here is that there is a differentiation between parking bays for the general public and parking bays for staff. For example, you can't have a functional Australian standard tandem parking bay because if you go in there and park and someone else parks behind you, you can't get out. But that arrangement, a bit like a tandem garage in a private dwelling, where you have a situation where it might suit employees, that sort of situation can be managed. So the short answer is yes, there are standards. The application under certain circumstances varies depending on the nature of the use of the land for different types of parking.
So I'm none the wiser there, Mr Mayor. So there's standards for parking, so customers have to be able to get out, but in this application we've got a Tetris plan of cars that you can't get out of. So I'm now hearing that's allowed because that's the only way they get their 56 parking bays.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the short answer is yes, there are a number of bays that will be designated exclusively for the use of the public. So in those situations, and of course you've got to remember there are members of the public who will be dropping cars off, and those cars then will be taken by the vehicle servicing people there and arranged for servicing. So yes, we're satisfied as per the report there ought to be enough car parking for the nature of the business.
And Mr Mayor, final question, just confirming there is nothing in the application or nothing future that will be putting a 6-foot security fence around that location. It will be an open car yard like what's normally expected.
Mr. Russell?
Certainly, Mr Mayor, there's nothing in the application that suggests any form of security fencing around the perimeter of the lot.
Thank you. Councillors, I know it's almost 8:15. Do you want to keep going or do you want to have your 10-minute break? Thank you. 4.3, the RA report on proposed industrial warehouse and ancillary uses at Talbot Road, Hazelmere. It's 4.3 on my sheet. Oh, sorry, I've skipped one, that's fine. 4.2, the RA report on a proposed childcare premises, Farrell Road, Midvale. Councillor Bowman?
The residual land, is there any plans for that? We just don't consider that. That's just become a wasteland.
Mr. Russell?
Through Mr Mayor, I hammered this point with the applicant, and then I hammered it again, and then for good measure asked him a third time. What is your proponent's consideration in the design of this facility not making provision for battle axe access leg to the rear? You will stymie yourself with this development, and you will not be able to develop and subdivide the rear of the lot for residential purposes without reliance on neighbours. And they've said, we don't care. We'll take that chance. If we're hamstrung and we've got to wait for development on that, we'll wait for development. Their intention, there is a house on that. Their intention is to keep the rest of that, balance that property effectively as a residential arrangement. And they will...
I think you've answered the question.
Keep it like that.
Sorry, now we get to 4.3, the RA report on the proposed industrial warehouse at Talbot Road. Councillor Catalano?
So I've got a few questions on this one. Now, mostly it's all around the public open space or whatever what they're calling the 2,475 square metres of landscaping. Number one, where is it? And number two, what are they going to be putting in?
Mr. Russell was just finding it.
The landscaping will be to the Talbot Road frontage. Precise details of the landscaping will be subject to a further plan, which you have here on page 578. And you can see there we've got a mix of broad bluffs and trees. They've got the magnolias, and a variety of shrubs and flowering plants that they populate the first strip along the interior of the interior. Strip of the frontage of the lot road will be parked out and
Okay. It's just that the warehouse is 9,228 metres squared, and the area of landscaping is supposed to be, well, let's just say a quarter of that. Well, that doesn't look like a quarter to me. So I can't understand what's going on. Because if they're going to put in 2,500 square metres of landscaping, that's excellent. And then I'd like to amend it so that they put in some marri trees, because this area down there in Hazelmere oh my God, it's terrible. It is really bad down there. We need to start sorting out the environmental issues down there.
Well,
So-
I think if you work with staff, Councillor Catalano, you can put it...
No, sorry. The question, though, I've got is, how can that blue area on page 578 be effectively a quarter the size of the warehouse? Or is that the whole... Oh, the warehouse is 9,000, so the rest of it is hard stand. Can I ask you something then? I've got another question then. When you talk about 10% of landscaping, Is it over the whole of the area that's going to be developed, or is it just over the size of the shed?
Through Mr Mayor, 10% of the site here so would be the lot, normally is how that's applied.
Yeah, so we don't have that. Can I work with you on that for the next couple of days for an amendment? Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. 4.4, proposed extension of time for winery, restaurant, food, beverage production, Great Northern Highway. No questions. Thank you. 4.5, proposed shed, Narimba Close, South Guildford. Councillor Johnson. Yes, when you're ready.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, through you, Mr. Mason, Mr. Russell, did the applicant explain why they needed such a tall shed?
Through Mr Mayor, yes, I believe the explanation offered was that the husband likes cars, wants to put a hoist in and tinker around with his cars. Which is an explanation we've heard before, Mr Mayor, with these types of sheds, not uncommon.
Anything come of that, Councillor Johnson? Thank you. Item 4.6, to use portion. Councillor Congredon. Alternative from Councillor Congredon. Thank you.
Are we able to get from staff, I'm not sure if it was asked before, what approval they've got for that? So,
I think the question was asked during the deputation of yourself, Mr. Russell, for us to get the. You'll just have to remind me, Councillor Bowman, what you've requested.
Through Mr Mayor, I understand Councillor Bowman is after a copy of the works approval and licence issued by the Department of Water, Environment and Conservation.
Can that be available for next Wednesday?
I know I have portions of that have been obtained. I don't know if I've got the total, but I can inquire with Jura to see whether we can obtain a copy.
Thank you. 4.7, proposed carport, Barbarossa Drive, Caversham. 4.8, proposed additional patio, existing home in Forge Lane, Hemmybrook. 4.9, proposed patio addition to Bluegrass Way, Dayton. 4.10, proposed internally illuminated pylon signage, Clayton Street, Bellevue. Councillor Howlett. What are you doing? Thank you. 4.11, statutory planning decisions under delegated authority. 5.1, proposed permanent road closure of a portion of Reed Highway. 5.2, tree removal request, Great Northern Highway, Middle Swan. Councillor Zanino. Yeah. Councillor Zanino, as the ward member, will take precedent.
Mr Mayor, I'll take mine away. Councillor Knight can do that one. But a question: can staff able to provide us further advice on the requirements of the Swan Valley Planning Act? Because from what I heard from the deputation, we haven't got a decision to actually make. Is it a requirement? So are we able to make that decision? Because the deputation quite clearly said that the Swan Valley Planning Act overrides all other legislation, and if that's the case, can we get advice on that? Because then I'd question whether we can actually even make a decision.
Thank you. 6.1, financial management report ending August 2022. 6.2, list of accounts paid, August 2022. 6.3, change in basis of valuation. 6.4, 2022-23 budget review. Councillor Bowman.
Just some questions, Mr Mayor. For example, the $95,000 for library office furniture and equipment, what is that exactly for? And why wasn't it included in our budget? Was there an issue with our budget process?
Ms Slay, have you got the answer or you need to take it on notice?
I'll take that one on notice, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Any other questions, Councillor Bowman, on that?
And Mr Mayor, just the Bullsbrook Community Kindergarten, was that not already some of that included in the budget? My recollection from discussions was there was just an additional amount that we agreed to because it was actually going to provide a better financial cost to the city, but it seems like the full amount is now in there. So was that not in the adopted budget?
Ms Lay?
Mr Mayor, according to the description, it states that that project was not included in the budget.
I've got a few more, but I'll send them through.
Thank you, that'd be appreciated. Turning the page, 7.1, revocation and suspension of meeting procedures. 7.2, proposed ordinary council meeting dates 2023. I see you've already indicated, Councillor Bowman.
I'm pulling it, but just a question. Is there a reason why special council meetings weren't listed for after the election? And then my second question would be, if they are listed now, would we not save costs because we wouldn't have to re-advertise the dates later on?
Okay, I note this talks about proposed ordinary council meetings. Mr CEO, can you assist on that one? Page 752, 748. Let's go to the small agenda.
Councillor, I assume you're referring to the special council meeting after the October 23 elections? Yes, I think it's a good point. If it's not there, I think it could be added in.
Thank you for that, Councillor Bowman. 7.3, recruitment of the Chief Executive Officer. Yes, Jeremy, can you just make sure that door shut of all the items on the agenda that you've been required to attend have been dealt